Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Practice Perfect podcast. My name is Jennifer McNamara. I am your host, and I'm here with my lovely co host, Maya Turner. Welcome to the show, Maya.
Hi, everybody.
Everybody.
Happy Wednesday. Happy Hump Day.
Woohoo! I know it's always nice to be here on a Wednesday knowing that our week is halfway over. Exciting
Yes.
times. Now, I'm excited about today's episode, but first of all, I think we should show off our coffee cups today, Maya, shouldn't we? What are we drinking
Ye-
today?
I am drinking a very strong cup of coffee for an audit that I'm doing that is out of Epic. And yeah, it's fun. Code, audit, repeat, powered, fueled by modifiers and coffee.
Yes, I
Coffee.
love it. I am drinking my Smart Men Mary Coders coffee cup, all from the J Inspired Threads shop that Healthcare Inspired started. And we're so excited that we have all the coder merch that we're all benefiting from. So go ahead and jump over to jinspiredthreads.etsy.com and buy yourself some merch. It's fun stuff. Well, today's episode is exciting because we're going to talk about my favorite dynamic. My favorite relationship is the coder and the physician. I
Yeah.
think that a lot of us over the years have developed good relationships with our surgeons, our physicians. And then we have those that don't have that experience, which I think if you've had the experience, it's hard to understand not having it. But then you realize that there are some situations that coders are put in and just different cultures in healthcare that don't make that possible. So we will talk about that today. I want to talk about, not only that relationship, but also the communication piece of talking to physicians. And it's one of the topics that I will be circling around different organizations that hire me to come speak this fall, because I am going to be traveling this fall speaking at different events. So if your organization is looking for a speaker for your team or an event, just let us know because we are booking those now. So Maya, what do you think about this communication? What are some of the things that we communicate with physicians that really only the coder is going to be able to explain to a physician?
I think honestly everything that's involved in the revenue cycle that he has an input with chart and converting that chart into revenue. The coder's job is to interpret and to ensure that the revenue is captured and captured appropriately. So I don't think there's any limits. I think the problem that we come across is how the coder is able to convey that information for in the way that the physician understands how it translates into revenue. So they really should be able to convey everything and convert it into a conversation.
Exactly. And like if you're married, you know what it's like when your husband's like, stop nagging me. Like we've heard that term, like, and we don't want to come across that way. And sometimes we don't realize we're doing that maybe, but we don't want to come across like a robot just repeating guidelines to them. And we don't want to come across as a nag. I hate that term, but it's a term.
Yeah.
And we don't want to come across as someone who is constantly telling them what they're doing wrong. And I've seen that. I have seen it so many times, and I just think some coders just weren't trained properly on how to communicate with a physician. They're just people too. I mean, some of them can be intimidating, yes, and I have experienced that in my own career as well. But there's a definite, I guess, what's the word? There's a definite. I love lost for words, Maya. Help me out here. You just take it from here because I'm losing my words here.
Well, you know what? I think there has to be a culture that has to be embraced, right? But I also think that constant negativity is borderline abusive. It's
Yes.
borderline abusive because if you're constantly feeding into negativity in the office and it's culturally driven, that provider is not going to want to talk to you because he's already trained that you're going to tell him something negative. What I
Mhm.
found to be extremely helpful in my communication and education and communicating with physicians, physicians are people and talk to physicians like they're people and how you want to be talked to. And I remember CJ Wolf, right? When he was on there, he said, physicians are people. Yeah, they want their ego stroked, but who doesn't, right? Talk
All
to
right.
them like they're real people. And I promise you, if you do that and you talk to them in real terms, the relationship will only go upward from there. I promise you. But constant negativity and belittling and condescending in the office is only going to create a negative outcome. If you learn to respect the doctors for what they do, he'll respect you for what you do.
Right. And even if they don't, even if you don't have that experience, at least you know you're being a decent human being to another human being. Like you're not always going to get this exact response that you want, but it doesn't mean you're not doing the right thing by
Yeah.
continuing to, act that way. Now, I want to say too that when we look at what our job is as coders, and you mentioned this, is to clarify, not criticize. We don't or not our job is not to tell them, oh, this is wrong, we're going to get denied this, don't make it negative, clarify. And sometimes there is a disconnect between what they do, obviously clinically, what their concerns are obviously are very different than what our concerns are, but they should somehow meet in the middle where we have this ultimate aligned goal of getting reimbursed. And so both sides have to come together to understand how to get that done.
Right. And also in communication, you have to be sure that you're not leading the physician to code something to get paid. That's a big no-no in the world of coding. You cannot lead a physician. This is an LCD. You need to put this diagnosis on there. No, 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 no. That is not the culture. You document for what's medically necessary in his eyes. He's clinically giving the medical decision making or the decision to treat a certain service. He's not treating the service to get the patient to get paid. He's treating the patient for to get services that are going to help them. And if it ever comes out that that's the culture, then you're going to have bigger problems.
Exactly. And, there's nothing wrong with showing a physician a policy. It is good for them to know what the policy is ahead of time because then that they're more prepared to have that conversation where they can say, because of your diagnosis, what we need to do for you is not technically covered by your insurance, but we still feel it's medically necessary and we want to give the opportunity to still have that if you choose. And, educating the clinical teams, they're the ones talking to the patient. So for instance, if you're having to fill out an ABN form, the clinical teams are the ones that actually have to get that done, not the front office teams, the business teams. They rely on the clinical teams to understand that form because they're the ones that have to present it to the patient before a treatment is given.
Oh, you done touched on something really big, Jen. And I think it's important from an auditing perspective, from a compliance perspective, and everyone knows this, right? That there's a couple of elements that need to be in part of the documents when they decide to proceed with treatment. One is the financial disclosure, one is the No Surprises Act, and the very last thing is for them to provide a uh clear, what's the word I'm looking for? A clear reason why services are not covered. And then they can make the intelligent decision and informed decision to proceed. Should it not be covered, the ABN should be on file, the appropriate modifier should be given, and the financial disclosures, the non surprises act, no surprises act information should be on file for them to be billed. If they are not, these things are not on file, mm-mm-mm, that's going to be a big issue. And we need to make sure that these things are in place. And how do we do that? Communication, education, making sure that everyone is aware because I've seen it with my own four peepers that when it's not done, it could cost millions of dollars. So it's very important, very, very important.
You just took me back. My dad used to call me peepers when I was a baby. Aw. It's so funny. I haven't heard that term in a really long time, but yeah, when I was little, him and his buddy used to call me peepers. Apparently, that was like a thing.
Oh,
Yeah,
my
so cute.
granddad called me chubby. Granddad called me chubby because I had chubby cheeks. Hey, chubby.
I
And
love
I
it.
would
I love
always
it.
just walk it in.
Oh gosh, that took me back. Anyway, well, you are correct. And so there's a lot about compliance. And honestly, physicians want to be accurate. They want to do things the right way for the most part, but they need our help to do that. And it needs to be
Yeah.
presented in a way that they understand the implications. And they have a medical license to protect. And a lot of the questions that, because we do credentialing at Healthcare Inspired, so we're heavily involved in that process of collecting their most updated medical license, their DEA, all of these documents that prove they can legally practice medicine. And if they miss any steps there, then they're not able to be enrolled in the insurance anymore. It's a flat, like, no, like, we're not going to pay you if you're not legally allowed to practice medicine. And we also want to make sure our clinics know if you don't have a valid license on file from your physician, you should not let them see patients. Like, that is a huge violation. And so what we do on the credentialing side, and then of course the billing side, is so important from a legal aspect. um, I think it's important for coders and billers, auditors, to know that we're the protectors, the legal protectors of making sure things don't go that way and things don't get violated, because compliance is real, the fraud is real, the going to jail is real, not only for physicians, but also coders have gone to jail for going along with things and not speaking up. So it's a real fear, I'm sure, but it doesn't have to be if we understand the rules and we understand the communication aspect of making sure everybody knows what their responsibility is.
And that's so important. And I think the coder's job, right, is to be a source of viable information. Period. Viable information. And, the LEIE, that's a real thing. If you're not a
Mhm.
source of viable clinical practice, is that a result of invaluable billing?
Could
Uh-oh.
be.
So the source of viable information, being compliant in that thing. Revenue cycle management and compliance go hand in hand. And I talked about this in the life of a claim, in this regard. And it's so, like, you can't get around it. They have regulations for a reason. It's called the CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, for a reason. People need to follow those. And if you don't know how to read the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 42, you better get familiar with it, because that is everything that's related to what we do, how we do it, and how it's regulated by the government.
Right, exactly. And how we actually ask questions to a physician is also important. So, our next segment, I want to talk about the query process. And we're first of all going to talk about, just in general, a query, whether it's written or verbal, what it needs to look like on the outpatient side. And keep in mind, there is an official query process that is documented and required for inpatient coders. But in general, let's say you're sending a message internally in the EMR, or you're still using paper or whatever. However, you're sending a message to a physician, a brief introduction, like when you message anybody, you tell them why you're messaging them. What are the actual, get to the point, ma'am, right? What are the facts, ma'am? Those are the things that they want to know. A suggested clarification, or not necessarily that, but give them an option to say yes or no, or is it yes or no, Maya, or is it the other way around? I'm forgetting now.
You have
What is
to
the
ask them to you have to ask them to clarify if what
yes?
they're saying is what they're saying. And it can't be yes or no, or they
That's
have to
can't
give.
be done.
Yeah, it can't be yes or no. It needs to clarify what they're trying to convey, and it should be an opportunity for them to explain it. Um, the query process can be tricky, right? Um, yeah, and I'll just I'll just leave that
Yeah,
there
well,
because
because the reason it is we're saying that is because that's all part of that official query process inpatient coders do. But I want to make sure everyone knows that the more we stick to that in the outpatient side, the better we're going to be. So even
right.
though it is official and inpatient coders have to follow that query process, and we'll go ahead and put that in our show notes, that official document that was revised in recent years by Actis. We want to make sure you read that, because it's good information to use in the outpatient setting, even though it's not technically required. It's
Yeah.
good information to use, to reduce risk, and just to really make sure that the true the physician is really giving you accurate information, and that you're not leading them in any way, because you're trying to be a physician, you're trying to jump over to the clinical side. And that is sometimes easy to do as a coder. We might know things because we've worked with the physician so long and we kind of know how they think, right? But we could easily cross that line from being a coder to trying to be a doctor and trying to
Mhm.
diagnose a patient when we do not have the authority and the information is not in front of us. We cannot infer anything.
Yeah, yeah. And what I got to make sure, because I'm bursting at the seams here, Jen. I mean, because this is so important, right?
Yeah.
And if you're not familiar with what Jen is speaking of for ACTIS, and I had to make sure I got this acronym right because I used to sit on the board with them, and it's the Association of Clinical Documentation Integrity Specialists. And what they do is they provide oversight for clinical documentation integrity for the inpatient side and the outpatient side. Hello. But there's a difference in coding for professional fee versus outpatient facility and inpatient facility.
Yeah.
They regulate those guidelines. But should it be different when you're querying? Absolutely not. Because the clinical documentation integrity specialists for both sides should be able to identify how the reimbursement is going to be made based upon a clarification of a diagnosis and or a procedure when it's performed. So you got to be very clear on the authorities for which and how they are identified for each segment that's related to the revenue cycle process. Very important.
Thank you, Maya, because I didn't want to butcher that because it's not something that I deal with every day, like Maya understands. And so, but I want you to know as a coder, there's different guidelines. Obviously, if you're new, you'll learn this, but there's different guidelines for different types of services, and you're going to learn that whether you work on the inpatient side or work on the professional fee side or an outpatient facility. Either way, whatever you do, follow the official query process. But another thing is just in your tone, not only verbally, but also in your writing style, use respectful, collaborative tones in your messaging. You want to be
Mhm. Mhm.
clear, but you also
Mhm.
want to make sure that it's in a respectful way. They are in a position of authority. I mean, most physicians are in a position of authority, obviously, because they usually own the practice or, ultimately, like, you work under them. So you want to make sure you are respecting them as your employer, as your, um, someone in a position of respect. But that doesn't mean that they should be treating you differently. They should also treat you with respect. And if that's not happening, then you definitely want to approach that with your compliance department.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you say that because there's a lot of things that we learn as coders, but one thing that we don't focus on is communication, right? We know
Oh,
how to code, we know how to, uh-oh, we know how to code, we know how to interpret guidelines, right? But that professional relationship between you and that physician should be driven by some, and I hate to say this, foundational grounding as a human being, right? But if you don't understand the method of communication that's effective for you and the physician, you could have more problems because you don't know how. If you don't know how, or if you're intimidated by them, that's a communication problem. And right, people smell
oh.
fear, especially physicians. So let's just keep it real, right? If you don't know how to communicate, that's an education opportunity for you. If they don't know how to communicate, that's an opportunity for them. Well, who can help that? Hello. So it's important that communication be a collaborative effort, not one-sided. It should not be a person that's of authority because they're authoritative figure. That doesn't mean they have the last say. It means that they have a collaboration responsibility with you as a coder. But you as a coder have to present viable information for them to respect you and for it to be collaborative. That's all I'm saying.
RESPECT, girl. I'm telling you what. Break it down for
Don't
me one time.
start.
No. Thank you, Jessica,
Those
for
two.
reminding us. Thank you, Jessica, for reminding us. RESPCT. Yes, that's
Yes.
love it, love it. Well, I want to share an experience that this really highlights because several years ago, I was working with a physician. We were doing their billing and their coding and cleaning up their AR. Their office manager had been let go and they were just in a mess. So we kind of took over the whole process for them just to get them caught up. He was great. I mean, he's an amazing surgeon, amazing person. And so I really enjoyed working with him. We had a great dynamic. But the ultimate goal was he was going to be joining another organization. So the ultimate goal was for us to clean up his billing so he could close that practice and before he moved on to his new organization he was joining. So once he joined there, I was going off my life, doing my thing, and then he contacts me one day and he's like, I'm having a problem with my coder. So he was like so used to me and my team and how we interacted. He had this new coder that he did not know really well and wasn't responding well to the feedback and how it was happening. So he would always text me and be like, hey, is this right? They told me this, is this right? And so I had to, kindly tell him, I appreciate that you reached out to me, but let me see if I can help you better interact with your new coder because there may be some code author, yes. There may be some situations that maybe this person is not understanding you and or understanding your documentation maybe, and there's a disconnect. But let me help you better interact with her as well. So I kind of just sweet talked him a little bit and let him know that yes, and I wanted to stroke his ego. Like, of course, he was correct, and yes, he was correct. What she was telling him was not correct from a coding standpoint, but it was just the way it was approached. So again, even if as a physician you come across a coder that is telling you you're wrong and they're approaching you in a very non-professional way, you can obviously take it upon yourself to react differently. But to a physician, that's how he felt. He felt attacked and he felt that he wasn't being heard. And that is something that I think we should understand as coders when we approach a physician a certain way. That's how it's coming across to them. And anyone who gets told they're wrong all the time and it gets told that, oh, you can't do it that way. That's not what my book says. I mean, that's literally what was happening is to him, the coder was saying, it's not in my book that way. And like, I don't know what made the coder say that because they should know that just because the book says it doesn't mean it's correct. And
Uh-oh.
the book, I think they meant their CPT book. But there's also articles out there on different, websites that provide guidance for coders that isn't always correct either. So what was happening is this coder was getting information from these like newsletters and articles that was written by somebody else who also was misinterpreting guidelines. So it's a snowball effect when coders get the wrong information and pass that along to their physicians who are just confused now because they think they're right and they're obviously right, but they were given bad information and then it's like the telephone game. You start out saying something and then by the time it gets to the next person it's completely wrong, and that is what's happening is we're getting wrong information, passing it along to people that don't know any better. They're just trusting us, and then everybody's wrong. So I
Oh,
don't know,
Jen.
it's a problem.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, oh, girl, you done touched a whole lot. Okay, I'm trying to contain myself, folks.
Another episode, girl.
Okay. Authoritative resources.
Yes.
Authoritative resources. Your job as a coder is to be a viable resource, one, and two, obtain that information from viable sources. You got to be the cool cousin with the six pack of beer. You can't be the hateful girlfriend. You got to
Yes.
make sure that, oh, listen, folks, that relationship and that dynamic is so important. And y'all think, Maya, did you really say cool cousin with beer with hateful girlfriend? Well, what
Oh,
situation
yeah.
have you not seen that at the party? Going, oh, sister, right? But again, it's about trusting, viability, and sources. What are you using to make you the viable source? CMS or the article from the coder who has a blog that may not have been trained properly. Yikes.
Yeah. Yeah. And people get ideas from all over. And not all organizations, have the ability to just vet every single article that comes through their platform. And because they trust that the people submitting articles to them are giving them accurate information. So it's up to you as the coder to make sure that what you're reading aligns with regulatory guidance. It's like not everything that you read online is correct. We know that, right? I mean, we've got videos of politicians that we know are being faked. Like we know there's fake videos out there. AI making you think people are saying things they're not saying. There's a lot of bad information out there, but it doesn't mean that there isn't accurate information out there as well. We just have to find
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I think this is a really valid point, and I was once asked, what's the best way to find valuable information for different specialties? The first thing is
Mhm.
to go through um, the authoritative specialty, make sure that they are following CMS guidelines, check CMS guidelines, and make sure that that information coincides. And most viable specialties will collaborate with the AMA and CMS because they're the ones who are rallying for the codes for CMS to approve. Okay, mm, I won't go there, but I'll just say there's an entire process. That's another episode, Jen. But I think that,
It is.
we got to make sure that we follow those authoritative guidelines through those specialties who follow CMS, that rally to CMS to get those claims approved for payment. And if you go through that process, this is how you become a viable source because one, you're going to compare with the specialty org, and then you're going to compare with CMS, and they're almost 99.9% of the time is going to use CMS references in their guidance because they're the ones who are rallying for CMS to pay them.
Exactly. And I'm going to tell you, I made the same mistake when I was baby coder. And I'm not coming out here saying that, oh, you should not do this because I never made this mistake. I made this mistake myself early
We all
on, my
did.
very first
Hmm.
job. I went to the physician. I knew what NCCI said. You can't do two scopes on the same shoulder. And I was like, you can't do that. You can't do that. I did the same thing as a new coder. And it did not go over well, I can tell you. But that was my first learning experience that I need to step back and realize what I'm saying. And so I pulled out the actual NCCI manual like I was supposed to do, showed them the paragraph. This is the reason why we can't do that in this situation. I want you to know what the payer is saying is what their guideline is. And I totally understand you did the work. And I want to promise you, you are getting paid for the work you did. This is just how it's getting paid.
Right.
And so explaining to them that what they're doing is valid and we're not discounting the work they did. So when we tell them we can only report this service this way, we're not trying to take money away. We're trying to explain to them the money is being valued this way in this situation.
Yes.
Explain to
Yeah.
them where their money is coming from.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's also important. I think this is a credentialing thing too, so we're all over the place. But I think certain contracts do allow for certain physicians to do certain things that are exclusive to them and that
Yes,
contract. So a lot of times the NCCI edits may say one thing, but the
right,
allowable contractual agreement may say something else. So it's the
right,
coder's job and the physicians to communicate when they can, when it's appropriate, because most of the time they know when they can't, but they can negotiate certain things within their contract in order for them to perform that service and get paid. So, it's really
mhm,
important for that kind of relationship and the communication, Jen, to be uh, conveyed that they are allowed to do certain things per their contract. Not everything is not NCCI guided, but it's
right.
more the exception rather than the norm. So you got to be really careful in this regard and make sure that that collaborative, communicative relationship is ongoing. And guess what? As a coder, when you're credentialing or in that process, your office manager or anyone, they should be able to tell you, or you should be able to look at that fee schedule yourself and understand what is and what isn't payable based upon that contract.
Exactly. And I do have that situation with my plastics docs where yes, to from the actual face value of the NCCI, it's wrong, but he has it built into his contract that he can do things outside of NCCI. So you don't always get to go to the physician and say that. You have to know that situation and ask somebody if you're not sure, that reads those contracts, because you don't always know everything. Let me tell you, you don't. So thank you everyone for joining today. We are going to pull back the curtain next week on a topic that Maya has done a recent webinar on, copy and paste. We're going to talk about the risks of copy and paste, EMR inefficiencies that we see all over the place, and using your coders to help build those templates. And it's going to be a great discussion. So stay tuned for next week. We're going to thank everyone for joining our episode today. Have a great Wednesday and a great rest of your week. We'll see you next time.